Good evening, everyone. In our time together so far, we've seen something that might feel unsettling. We've learned that the self is not a single unified thing. It is a collection of social identities. It can shift depending on the context. It can be depersonalized, shaped by the reflected gaze of others, and even constructed anew through conversation. And yet, most of us don't walk around feeling like a chaotic jumble of disconnected selves. We feel most of the time like one person. We have a sense of continuity, a story that holds our life together. Tonight, we're going to explore that sense of wholeness. How do we achieve it? What do we do when it's threatened? And what happens when it's strong or when it's fragile? We'll explore 3 big ideas. First, the quest for self-coherence, the psychological drive to weave our many identities into a single, meaningful autobiography. Second, the idea of a true self, the deep-down core we believe makes us who we really are, versus the peripheral layers we can lose without losing ourselves. And third, the concept of self-concept clarity, how clearly and confidently we know ourselves, and the profound impact that clarity has on our well-being, our resilience, and our relationships. Let's begin with the quest for coherence. Part 1. The quest for self-coherence. Here's a truth about the human mind. Despite having multiple selves, multiple roles, multiple identities, we strive for an integrated picture of who we are. We don't just want a list of our parts. We want a coherent autobiography, a story that weaves all those parts together into a single, meaningful narrative. When that coherence fails, we suffer. People with highly fragmented selves, for example, some individuals with schizophrenia, amnesia, or Alzheimer's disease, struggle to function effectively. The sense of a unified self is not a luxury, it is essential for navigating the world. But how do we build that coherence, especially when life forces us through radical change? Let me introduce you to Sofia, the military veteran turned expressive arts therapist. Sofia served for 12 years as a combat medic in the Army. That role demanded a very specific kind of self: emotional suppression, rigid protocol, swift and decisive action under fire. Vulnerability in that world was a liability. After leaving the military, Sofia retrained as an expressive arts therapist. Now her work is helping trauma survivors heal through painting, movement, and poetry. At first, the transition felt like a complete personality rupture. In her own words, in the Army, vulnerability was a liability. In the therapy room, vulnerability is the whole point. I felt like a fraud in both places. 2 selves, culturally framed as opposites: the stoic, procedural soldier and the emotionally open, creative therapist. How do you inhabit both without feeling like a contradiction? Gradually, Sofia crafted an integrated identity. She found the thread that connected her 2 lives. She said, "As a medic, I learned to walk into chaos and find the one thing that could stop the bleeding. In therapy, I walk into emotional chaos and help people find the one image, the one gesture that restores their sense of self. The tools are different, but the core instinct is identical: look for the wound no one else can see and apply the right pressure." I didn't leave the medic behind, I just expanded what healing looks like. The uniform is gone, but the mission continues. This is the quest for coherence in action. Sofia does not pretend that her 2 selves are the same. She does not minimize the differences. Instead, she builds a coherent autobiography around a deeper theme: trauma healing under fire. The battlefield becomes a metaphor for the therapy room. The medic's triage skills become the therapist's attunement. The narrative subsumes both selves into a single evolving life story, a story in which the second chapter would be impossible without the first. We all do this, often without realizing it. We are the authors of our own life stories, constantly revising the narrative to make sense of where we've been and who we are becoming. Part 2. The true self-core versus peripheral. But within that coherent story, we also make another crucial distinction. Some parts of our identity feel absolutely essential, Others feel superficial or for show. Lose the peripheral parts and you're still you. Lose the core and you would no longer be the person you recognize. Recent research on the true self, defined by Strominger and colleagues in 2017, focuses on exactly this, the set of characteristics that make a person who they are deep down. Without these essential aspects, a person wouldn't be who they really are. Let me give you a powerful example. Meet Clara, the musician who can't play anymore. Clara has been a concert pianist since childhood. She has performed on stages around the world. Her identity is inseparable from the piano. Then, a car accident takes away the fine motor control in her right hand. She can no longer play professionally. Everyone around her expects a total identity collapse. And indeed, Clara goes through a long, painful grieving period. But then she realizes something unexpected. She says, "Playing piano is what I did, but it wasn't at the deepest level who I am. The real me is someone who needs to communicate beauty and emotion, to translate feeling into something others can experience. I can still do that, just not with my fingers." Clara becomes a composer and a teacher, helping young musicians find their own expressive voices. When a former colleague says, "It must be devastating to lose your identity," she responds, "I lost the tool, but I didn't lose the music. The music was always in here." This is the distinction between core and peripheral in action. The physical act of playing piano and even the public identity of concert pianist proved to be peripheral aspects of Clara's self-concept. They were things she did, roles she held. But her essential core self was a deeper trait, the drive to create and communicate emotional beauty. Without that creative core, she would no longer feel like Clara. Without her performance ability, she is still recognizably the same person, just expressing the same essence through a different channel. The example shows how people intuitively distinguish between the unchanging center and the changeable surface of the self. When we say that's not the real me, we are making exactly this distinction. We are saying my core is intact even if my surface has been altered. Part 3, Self-Concept Clarity. So we seek coherence. We sense a true core. And these psychological processes are deeply related to a concept that researchers have studied extensively, self-concept clarity. Self-concept clarity, introduced by Campbell and colleagues in 1996, refers to the extent to which a person's self-beliefs are clearly defined, internally consistent, and stable over time. It's about having a coherent and unified sense of who you are, not just in theory, but as a felt, lived experience. When your self-concept clarity is high, you know yourself. Your sense of identity is not vague or contradictory. And this clarity has profound benefits. The benefits: resilience in the face of life's blows. First, high self-concept clarity is associated with higher self-esteem. Greater subjective well-being, that means more life satisfaction and positive mood, better coping with daily negative events and injustices, more open communication, and a stronger ability to cope with relationship breakups. Let's see what this looks like in real life. Navigating a relationship breakup with intact self-worth. Myra's partner of 4 years ends the relationship abruptly. It is a shock. She is deeply saddened. But she does not fall into an identity crisis. She tells her sister, "Of course it hurts, but I know who I am outside of this relationship. I'm still a loyal friend, a curious traveler, and someone who eventually bounces back. Losing him doesn't erase those parts of me." Because Myra's self-beliefs are clearly defined and stable, the breakup wounds her emotionally but does not shatter her fundamental sense of self. She grieves the loss without losing her footing. She can be heartbroken and still know she is a whole person. Within a few months, she is actively rebuilding her life. Her self-concept clarity acted as a psychological anchor in the storm, staying grounded after an unfair workplace criticism. Daniel, a project manager, receives a scathing performance review. He knows it is factually distorted, driven by office politics, not by his actual work. Rather than spending days spiraling into self-doubt, he thinks, I know my strengths, I communicate clearly, I meet deadlines, and my team trusts me. This review is unjust and I'll challenge it, but it doesn't redefine who I am at work. His clear self-view allows him to cope with this daily injustice without a drop in self-esteem. He responds calmly in the rebuttal meeting, citing concrete evidence. Why? Because his internal sense of self is not riding on that single external judgment. He knows who he is, so a distorted review cannot shake him. The fluidity of clarity, it can wobble. But here's something crucial. Self-concept clarity is not a fixed personality trait that you either have or don't have. Research by Neslek and Plesko in 2001 using diary studies showed that clarity can fluctuate from day to day. It notably decreases on days when people experience negative events, an effect mediated by negative mood and lowered self-esteem. In other words, a bad day can fog the mirror. The artist after a crushing rejection. Elena is a ceramicist. She generally knows her style and trusts her creative voice. On Monday, she writes in her journal, I make quiet, sculptural pieces that explore memory. That's who I am as an artist. Her self-concept is clear. On Tuesday, she receives a curt email from a gallery she deeply respects, rejecting her portfolio with the line, work lacks contemporary edge. That evening, her journal reads, maybe I've been delusional. Am I even an artist? I have no idea what my voice is. Her clarity has plummeted. But here's the point, the dip is temporary. By Thursday, after talking with her mentor and returning to the studio, she writes, I overreacted. A single rejection doesn't erase my vision. I still know what I'm trying to say. The dip was mediated by the sharp drop in mood and self-esteem that followed the negative event. Once those stabilized, clarity returned. So clarity is not a fixed castle. It is more like a living tree that can bend in a storm but, if rooted well, stands tall again. The bidirectional relationship, clarity and self-esteem feed each other. The relationship between self-concept clarity and self-esteem is reciprocal. It's a two-way street. It's easier to feel good about yourself when you know who you are. And it's easier to know who you are when you feel good about yourself. A large gap between one's actual and desired self-esteem is also a predictor of lower clarity. But the reverse is also true. When self-esteem collapses, clarity can dissolve right along with it. The divorce that destabilizes a man's sense of self. Victor has always been a confident, self-assured person. He described himself without hesitation, a devoted husband, a reliable friend, a skilled carpenter. His self-esteem was high, and his self-concept was crystal clear. Then, after 20 years of marriage, his wife leaves him. Victor's self-esteem collapses. And as it falls, something else happens. He begins to doubt everything. In the weeks that follow, he tells his brother, I don't even know who I am anymore. Was I actually a good husband? If I was, why did she leave? Maybe I'm not as loyal as I thought. Maybe I'm selfish and I never saw it. His formerly sharp self-view becomes hazy and contradictory. The blow to his self-esteem did not just make him feel worse about himself. It literally eroded the clarity of his self-concept. Qualities he once held as certain, I am loyal, I am reliable, suddenly became uncertain. And as his clarity disintegrated, his self-esteem sank further because he no longer had a stable foundation to remind him of his worth. This is the reciprocal flow in the negative direction. Self-esteem and self-concept clarity can lift each other up, or they can drag each other down. Experimental evidence. Clarity can be manipulated and it affects our relationships. Finally, I want to share a striking experimental finding that shows just how directly self-concept clarity shapes our lives. In 2010, Lewandowski and colleagues demonstrated that self-concept clarity can be actively manipulated in a laboratory. And when it is, it has immediate consequences for our closest relationships. Participants were primed to think about times they acted inconsistently with their self-view. This created temporary confusion about who they were. Compared to those primed for consistency, these participants showed decreased satisfaction and commitment to their romantic relationships. Let me bring this to life. The diary exercise that spoils date night. Sophie and her partner Jake have a warm, committed relationship. One afternoon, Sophie participates in an online self-reflection study, unaware of its real purpose. She is asked to spend 15 minutes writing about 3 times she acted completely out of character. Times when she, a self-described honest person, told significant lies. When she, a generous friend, refused to help someone in need. When she, a calm person, screamed at a stranger. By the time Jake arrives for their planned date night, Sophie is irritable and distant. She catches herself thinking, I don't even know who I am. What if Jake loves someone who doesn't exist? She is less affectionate. She picks a fight over a minor comment. Later, she tells him, I just feel weird about us tonight. The next morning, the confusion has faded, and she feels her usual closeness again. But for those few hours, the temporary disruption to her self-concept clarity had a direct, measurable effect on her relationship. Because she felt she didn't know herself, she could no longer feel secure in the bond that was partly built on that self. This is the Lewandowski effect in action. Sophie's temporary self-concept confusion directly diminished her relationship satisfaction and commitment that evening. The experiment and the story reveal a profound truth. Knowing yourself is not just a private matter. It is a social resource. It helps you show up fully for the people you love. Part 4, Bringing it together. So where does all this leave us? We've seen that the self is a multiplicity, yet we cannot live as fragments. We are driven, like Sofia, to weave our disparate identities into a coherent autobiography, a story that makes sense of where we've been and who we are becoming. That story is not a prison. It is a work of art, and we are its authors. We've seen that within that story, we distinguish a true self from the peripheral layers. Like Clara, we may lose abilities, roles, even entire chapters of our lives, and yet feel that our essence remains. That core, the drive to create, to love, to seek meaning, is what we protect most fiercely. And we've seen that the clarity with which we know ourselves is a quiet but immense power. It buffers us against heartbreak and injustice, as it did for Mira and Daniel. It can wobble on hard days, as it did for Elena, but it can be restored. It dances in a reciprocal embrace with self-esteem, as Victor's painful story shows. And it is the foundation upon which healthy relationships rest, as Sophie discovered. So, what can you take home tonight? First, attend to your autobiography. You are living a story that connects your past selves to your present. When you feel fragmented, ask, what is the deeper theme that runs through my life? What mission continues even as the uniforms change? Second, get clear on your core. Distinguish between the tools you use and the music inside you. Roles may come and go, but knowing your essential values gives you a compass that survives any storm. Third, protect and cultivate your self-concept clarity. This is not about being rigid. It's about knowing yourself well enough that when a distorted performance review comes, or a rejection email lands, or a relationship ends, you are shaken but not shattered. You can grieve without losing the knowledge of who you are. And finally, be gentle with the temporary fog. A bad day, a harsh word, a painful memory, these can cloud the mirror. That's human. The fog will lift. Reach out to the people who help you see yourself clearly again. And remember that the very act of seeking coherence, of wanting to know yourself, is the signature of a mind that is alive and growing. Thank you.